latest thing is in the news, but we are supposed to base and have our values set on what God's word says. And so they went through and they were talking about giving different examples of the different things that we're supposed to have as values in our life, that God is supposed to be number one. Then it comes our family. Then it's the church being about God's kingdom and his purpose, and then work and friends and everything else. It all filters down from there. But one of the points that they made, which I thought was just really important for all of us to understand too, is that even within those priority lists, there are a secondary set of them. Like with family, the Bible says that the top tier, the thing that has to be most important, is husband and wife. That dynamic there, and that then the second tier of importance is kids, and then grandkids and things after that. Your dog is somewhere down there too, of course. Makes the list, but it's lower. But one of the things that they mentioned is that when your priorities are out of alignment, that actually is us not loving well. How if the number one in family is supposed to be your spouse, but if you elevate your kids above that and live for your kids, that yes, you are taking care of them, and at the same time, you're actually creating an unhealthy dynamic. Because the only way to have a healthy relationship with someone is if they're in the right place according to how God says they're supposed to be. So your kids should be above your friends, but no relationship on this earth should be above your spouse. And then your spouse shouldn't be above your spouse shouldn't be above God. You can't go to your spouse for things that only God is supposed to provide. And one of the things that I always love to say is that humans, we make great partners but horrible gods. We get it wrong every time. We mess things up. We make horrible gods. So we need to make sure we keep those priorities, the values that we have, in the right place. God's calling right now to tell us what one of those values is. Quick rabbit trail. When I was traveling doing youth ministry, I used to call my dad during a service every single Sunday the entire year I was gone, hoping his phone would go off one of those times. I only got him twice, but it was just kids. It's what we do, right? We're tiny terrorists. I was 18, so I guess I was kind of bigger terrorist, but either way, you just mess with your parents. So Pastor Maria, they started us off with talking about the fact that we need to have values, that God sets them, and that they have to be in a certain priority list. So now today what I want to talk about is figuring out what values do. How do we define a value? How do we make sure and know that, okay, is this a value? Is this just an emotional response? What does this look like? And when I have something that's a value in my life, when I'm taking a biblical value, or another way that you get your values is through prayer. So the Bible's full of values, things it says that you're supposed to pay attention to, things that all Christians are supposed to do, that we're supposed to serve, we're supposed to reach out to the world, we're supposed to help the poor and the lost and the lonely, and we're supposed to show up for the hurting, and we're supposed to go into all the world and make disciples. There's certain values and commands that God has given us that sets priorities to husband, love your wife as Christ loved the church. We have all of these things in there that do set that. And those are ones that go for everyone. But then there's also things that God has called you to. Values that he's going to have, that he puts in your heart, that go a little deeper than that. And those we find out through our relationship with him. So that's what we're going to get into. And the main thing I want you to know today, the number one takeaway, is that values move you to action. And if you want to know if something is a value of yours, it's going to be something that moves you to action. And it's going to produce a change in your life. And that's really what that's the thing that shows the difference between a Hobby Lobby sign and a value, is if it changes something. So you can walk through Hobby Lobby and become very inspired and think, that would be great, I should put that up. My kids will read it every day and know I'm the best mom ever. There's lots of great things in there, but does it move you to action? Does it change your words, your actions, your thoughts? and your focus. And I want to give an example of this. I'm going to share a couple stories with you guys today, but the first one is going to be the story of a gal named Katie Davis Majors. And Katie, when she was 18 years old, she just graduated from high school. She's from Tennessee. And in 2006, right after graduating high school, she went on a short-term mission trip to Uganda. And while she was there, something happened in her heart. She fell in love with the people there, and she saw the need, and God did something, and she came back from that trip. And what was supposed to be a gap year, so taking a year off between high school and college, changed from that trip. And she came back and she told her parents that she's moving to Uganda. She's adopting 13 Ugandan girls and starting a ministry. And I personally would have loved to be in the room to see that conversation. Like, they were already nervous when she said she's taking a gap year. They're always like, all right. And then she's like, well, I'm in that gap year. I'm going to Uganda on a mission trip. Like, okay, we raised her right. And then she comes back and she's moving. Like, I would have loved to be there. But she ends up moving there, and then she ends up starting a ministry, and now she's reaching hundreds and hundreds of children there. But it all came from something that was put in her heart that she didn't know was there until she got into that environment. There was a value, there was something important to her that God had put there that she was looking for and didn't know about until she got into Uganda and saw the need. And then that value produced a change. It changed the course of where she was going, what she was going to do. And today I have a few of my favorite verses we're going to be looking at, but one of them is this. Ecclesiastes 3:11, he says, he made everything beautiful in its time. He also planted eternity in men's heart and minds, a divinely implanted sense of purpose working through the ages, which nothing under the sun but God alone can satisfy. God has put something in us that nothing but him can satisfy. There are things that nothing but God will fill. And there's things that we're called to that unless we are going to God, we'll never find out. And we end up going through life and we're not content and we're upset about things. And we always are trying to fill this void and having to get the next best thing. And a city like Naples, you can see a lot of that. It's weird living in a place where a car that's more expensive than your house can drive by. But God has called us all to do something. And so as we are discovering these values, what he's called us to, number one is it produces a change. The second thing that a value does is it sticks with you. A value is not going to be a thought that's just a quick flash in the pan. It's going to be something that prevails over the decades. It's going to be something that you can't really get away from. It's not going to be like the flash paper magicians use, where it's like poof, and it looks cool, and it makes the audience go, oh, but then it's gone, and there's nothing else after that. A value sticks with you over time. And Pastor talked about this last week, where he said that a value is not something that is emotion-based. A value isn't something that you respond to emotionally, or at least not exclusively. Because emotions, they're fickle. They change quick. You can be watching TV and there's a commercial and it's the sad puppies with the same song that's always been there. So yes, thank you. You know the one? I will remember you. And you're like, puppies! And then the next commercial is Universal's new ride, and you're like, yes. Tears are gone. Get in the car. We're driving. Emotions is not where values come from, even though values can have an effect on our emotions. But what we see with our values is that values should impact our emotions, but they cannot be determined or defined by them. So it's something that sticks with you, and it's longer than just how long an emotion lasts. And with this idea of a value sticking with you, I'm going to share a few stories from my life and a value that God has on me, and it's one that says, go into all of the world. In 2009, I still have the notebook where I wrote down that said, I am called to the world, exclamation point, I don't know what this means, but I'm excited. If I wasn't a pastor, I would still go on mission trips and go out. And before I was a pastor, I did. And I'm going to continue through my whole life because it's something God has called me to. Like Katie, it's one of those things that he's put inside my heart, and I know I have to respond to it, but it started young, and there's something that happens in your heart, I believe, on a mission trip that doesn't happen many other places because you're getting outside of America and seeing the world through a different lens. And it's something that you can never get away from. Once you start to change how you see things, it impacts forever. And the story I want to share with you guys is, the first one is from back in about 2000 or so, when our church was about 250 people or so, and we were out on 41. That's where the original building was. And through some connections we had, we heard about a need in Immokalee where we were going to go out and we were going to give toys to some of the kids there. And what I did is I took my backpack and I emptied everything out, and I went to my room and I filled it as full as I could with toys of all of my stuff. We went out there and I gave away all the toys and my backpack. But that happened not because my parents are pastors or because, well, okay, maybe a little bit because they're pastors because of the environment they put me in, but I'll get to that in a second. They didn't ask me to do that, but that was what was in my heart because growing up, when I was younger, and I was an early teenage, probably, 11, 12 at this point when that happened. Before that, though, we lived in Belarus. My parents started a church there. That's a third world country. It's one that's in the news right now that is helping Russia with the issues in Ukraine and stuff. Not a place you'd want to visit right now. But when we lived there, I experienced a very different lifestyle and things than here. And my friends, when we would play, there was only 2 girls in the apartment building we were in that spoke English that I could even kind of talk to, and my broken Russian and their broken English, we could actually hang out and play. And I was there when I was 3 years old, so as a 5-year-old, wanting just to have someone to play with, we would have tea parties with real tea and tomatoes because you couldn't afford cookies. So my mindset on toys and things, did I enjoy having them? Sure. But they didn't matter when someone else was hurting. And that's something that's a value. That's what God says is if you have the ability to help someone and you don't, that's actually a sin. Some of you are looking at me like, I don't like that. Well, take it up with God. I didn't write it. But it's important. Another thing that has stuck with me and will stick with me forever, this is from when I was probably around 12 to 13 years old. We would go back to Belarus. At that time you could. Right now you can't really, but at that time, you could go back, and we would go to what are called Chernobyl camps. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what Chernobyl is, it was a nuclear power plant that exploded and caused radiation to go all over. And in some countries, it wasn't as bad, but in places like Belarus, where the government is interesting, that's the best way I'll put it, they didn't warn the people about it until it was too late. And so you have these Chernobyl camps, and this is a place where families will bring and drop off the children in the family that are born with defects, and they're severe. We're talking not enough limbs or too many limbs, and mental and psychological and body developmental issues that they'll have to deal with forever, and they don't have any resources for it, and so they just get dropped off, and you have hundreds of kids at these camps with a couple of nurses and stuff, and that's where they'll live. And we used to go to those places, and there's 2 kids that will never leave my mind. Number 1 was this little boy who we were making balloon animals for, and so we could make like dogs and giraffes because, the giraffe's just a dog with a long neck, so you could go back and forth between the 2. And we'd give it to him, and he'd get so excited. He'd grab it, and he'd get the biggest smile on his face, and he'd squeeze so tight that it would pop. And then he'd immediately just start bawling. And then someone else would make him another one, hand it to him, and he'd get so excited and the biggest smile on his face, and he'd squeeze it so tight, and then it would pop. And after the first 5 times of this, of everyone trying to get it back to him, eventually we just had 2 people there just making balloon animals for this kid alone. And then the other one that stuck in my head is this girl who, she looked to be about the size of a maybe 1-year-old, size of an infant with the developmental state of a 1-year-old and the proportions of a 1-year-old, but was 26 years old. And then the next one that I'll share is from a widow's home from just a few years ago when we were in India. And Pastor and I went there, and we went to what was called a widow's home. This is a place where either your village drops you off or you go there yourself if you have no family to take care of you. And their rooms had one single light bulb. There was no running water. They had made out of like a tree, not wood like MDF, like IKEA furniture wood, like a tree limb bed. The food that they were making for that night was rice, and then their meal the next morning was going to be what they called rice porridge, where they were going to drink the water from the rice that was left over from the rice they made the night before. And that's all they had. And there was this older lady, and she pulled herself out from her room because she couldn't use her legs. And she asked what mine and Pastor's name were, and she wrote it down with chalk on the floor, and then she prayed that we would be blessed. Values stick with you. They don't leave. There's something that cause change in your life. And while they do pull on your emotions, they're not determined by them. And the other thing we see with values is that values are connected to your heart. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life." And what we see is that values determine where you'll go. Values determine what you're going to do in life, the sacrifices that you're willing to make. I'm not saying this because I'm a pastor. I'm saying this because I'm a Christian. And if you've been around for any length of time, you've heard pastors say that if God told him he wasn't the pastor tomorrow, next Sunday he'd be in the church serving, because serving and being a part of the church is what Christians are called to, not what pastors are called to. It's the same for me with this. If tomorrow, if I wasn't a pastor, that's not why I would do this. But if someone called and said, "Hey, that widow's home, we have a chance to move them and build them a better facility," I would leave tomorrow, and I don't care what it costs. Because values stick with you. If you want to know what you value, and if it's the right thing, the easiest way to determine that is to look at where your resources are going. There's awesome apps for that. You can put it in, and it budgets everything, and it shows you the percentages of where you spend stuff. And if you want to know, are your values lining up with God's values? Look at the things God said you're supposed to value compared to where you're spending your money. Glad one person in here is on my side. Thanks, guys. No, this is supposed to make us think. Because, you know what, the Bible isn't a fluff book about, hey, everything's good and you become a Christian and the devil can't get you and woohoo! The Bible says, don't be surprised when the world hates you. They hated me first. In this life you will have tribulation. That's encouraging. Though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death. That one continues, you can fear no evil, for I am with you. And that's how they all end. You'll have tribulations, world, but don't worry, for I have overcome the world. What we see as a Christian is that we have the ability to get through things that no one else does because God is on our side. Not that we won't go through anything because God is on our side. But what we focus on, where we spend our time, should be determined by the values that God lays out for us. And it should be reflected in our time and our talent, our treasure, our touch, our focus, our love, and where we're willing to make sacrifices. Values are connected to your heart. Another thing, values only stay quiet for so long. There's a recent study done that said that 96% of people self-identify as not living up to their potential. 96% of people say that they are not doing everything they feel they can or should, that they're not living up to their potential. And I think that goes back to Ecclesiastes, where there's a God-shaped piece of eternity that nothing else satisfies except for him. I think there's a part of us where we've gone for what the world defines and says are valuable, that we need to have the best job and the nicest career and the newest boat and the next car and all these things, and we're focusing on that. You got to get your kids into sports and into hobby clubs, and they need time by themselves, and they need time with friends. And there's all these different ideas, and no caffeine, and yes caffeine, and we have everything else defining what is valuable except for God's word. And I think that's what leads to these moments where people, it seems like they implode or they explode, and they're like, it looked like everything was right. And maybe it was by the world's definition of having everything, except they weren't pursuing the thing that God had called them to pursue. And so nothing satisfied it. Another one of my favorite verses, Jeremiah 20, verse 9 says, "But if I say I'll never mention the Lord or speak in his name, his word burns in my heart like a fire. It's like a fire in my bones. I'm worn out trying to hold it in. I cannot do it." And I wonder how many of us are going through life right now where there's something God's called us to and we're just so tired because we've been holding it in. Or we're like, well, we got to get to this place before we can do this. Do you think Katie would have ever started her thing if she didn't respond immediately? If she had gone back home and said, okay, well, I need to go to college now because that's what everyone says, and I told my parents I was going to do that. And 4 years later, those girls in Uganda are a distant thought and just something that they remember, that she remembers, and it's a cool picture that she shares when the memory comes up. And I wonder how many of us have those things in our life where there's something God's called us to, a value he's placed that we're just far from. The other thing that values do is they affect everything. Your values affect everything. When you start to value what God values and what he said you are supposed to value, you start to care about the church more. You start to think about the world more. Our church on a global scale supports dozens of ministries. Some in countries where it's illegal to be a Christian. So why sometimes you're like, well, why aren't you in this country? We probably are, but we just can't say anything because it'll get them in trouble. You have to be careful how you support them, how you send money, how you send resources. Within our country, there are many churches that we support. There's churches that are younger than our church that pastor has on his heart to support because he doesn't want them to have to go through the same struggles that he did, that our church experienced when it was younger. We have churches, yes, we have global, we have in our country. Let's jump down into Florida. Pardon me. In Florida, whenever there's hurricanes and power lines are down in this area, we partner with FP&L and other people to house their workers they're bringing in from out of state on site. So they can help when there are firefighters that come in from out of state to help when we have some of the big crazy fires in the Everglades. Our church supports that. Jumping down closer into Collier, the sheriff's office, we partner with them. They call us when they need stuff. They just used our facility for an active shooter training just a few months ago. We partner with the schools. We've adopted Bear Creek, and one of the cool things about that is now we have an in with the principal, and we've told her, not only are we bringing these supplies now, but during the year, if you have any kids that you find out that their families are struggling, call us first. Because our church loves our community, and we'll show up for them. So we have new ways of doing that. Pastor Jeff mentioned Mission Christmas, which is where we partner with Salvation Army to get toys for kids in our community. You know what? Every year We've done more and more. Last year, we filled almost 2 entire 26-foot trucks. This year, we're going for 3, guys. Okay? So that's 3, so we got to get bigger toys. So no one gets Starbucks till the end of the year, all right? This isn't Starbucks. We can do things, and then all the way down to silly things. And I'm going to read you something because, you can pray for my wife. This really happened. We can go all the way down to Chick-fil-A and our interactions with people there. Values impact everything. Whenever my wife is going to go grab something, if she's getting something to eat for me, and she'll text me like, hey, what do you want? I'm out. Send me your order. This is where I'm going. And ChatGPT is a wonderful thing. I have an entire chat that is exclusively called Ridiculous Meal Orders. So this is what she got. Greetings, noble keeper of the sacred waffle fries. Today I embark on a culinary quest most epic. I humbly request, not merely order, but summon 4 glorious golden chicken strips, each kissed by the divine breading of Chick-fil-A tradition. To accompany this feast, I shall require a chalice of Coke Zero, fizzing with the might of 1,000 carbonated storms, and fries so heavenly that even angels would trade their harps for a single bite. And lo, I beseech thee, do not forget the elixir of legends, the Chick-fil-A sauce. Without it, my meal would be but a shadow of its destined greatness. Yeah, pray for her, guys. But what happened with that order is she read that to the guy at Chick-fil-A. And she goes, I'm sorry. My husband, I'm sorry. He's ridiculous. And he goes, well, what does he do? Like, why does he do this? She goes, oh, no, this has nothing to do with his job. He's a pastor up the road, but this is what he does. He's like, well, what church? He said, Naples Church. He goes, I'm going to come to your church because I love that. That's hilarious. Who you are, what you are, impacts everything. And let me tell you, you can be a lot more joyful and happy following and living in what God has for you than otherwise. Next thing we see with values is that values may not cost you everything, but it will cost you something. It's going to cost you something. You have to do something. Values and what God calls you to will never keep you in your seat. If you're saying like, oh, well, God just told me to wait. I'm not supposed to do anything yet. That might be for a season, but if that's been 10 years, the waiting is done. God is waiting for you to get up and move, to do something. And what's amazing and how God's designed this whole thing to work is that when we all do our thing, everything gets done. We see that in Nehemiah chapter 3. In the whole book of Nehemiah, if you've never read this, it's about this gentleman named Nehemiah who was far away from Israel, from Jerusalem, from God's people. He had been taken in slavery a long time ago. He was in a different place, serving the king there. He heard about the state of the city, that the walls were torn down, that there was nowhere to worship, that the people were getting raided and just beat up. They were in a bad place. And he was moved. He went to the king, asked if he could go, and if the king would finance rebuilding a different nation. And because of God's favor, he said yes. He went. They start building, and this is what happens in all of chapter 3. It's a great chapter. What it goes through, and it says what everyone did. It said then Elishib, the high priest, and the other priests started to rebuild the sheep gate. They dedicated it and set its doors, building the walls as far as the Tower of the 100, which they dedicated, and the Tower of, I don't know how to say this word. People from the town of Jericho worked next to them. Beyond them was Zakur, son of Amiri. The fish gate was built by the sons of, sure, that's a great one. Hezanah, we'll go with that. They laid the beams, and then it just goes through, and it says, and then this person worked next to this person. They repaired the next section. Beside him was this person, and they repaired the next section. And besides them was the next person, and they rebuilt the next section. And it just goes down, and some of them did a small portion. Some of them did a huge thing. Some of them did just what was behind their house. And some rebuilt one entire side of the wall, but they all worked together and they did their piece of it, and they were able to do everything that God needed. And so what you have to understand is that what you have to give today makes a difference. You can start pushing forward with what God has called you to today, where you are, exactly as you are, without having to change a single thing, without having to have another dollar in your pocket, without having to have another certification under your belt. You can start today. I love this verse, Exodus 4, verse 2. This is Moses when he's at the burning bush. God is calling him to go set his people free. And Moses is saying he doesn't know what to do, and he's feeling nervous about it. And right here it says, and the Lord asked him, what is that in your hand? A shepherd's staff, Moses replied. God said to go out and use that. But this idea right here, God asking what's in your hand, is so common throughout the Bible, where we see that God simply says, what do you have right now to use? Go make a difference. I'm going to say there's probably a little over 300 of us in this room. Did you know that if every single person in here, we all gave a certain dollar amount, but no one gave the same amount, and no one gave more than 300, that the consecutive sum of $1 to $300, so what we have in our hands, someone in here is like, okay, I can do the 300. Someone goes, I can do the 299. Someone else is like, I can do the 120. Another person's like, I got 12. One of us in here is like, I've got the 1. But we all do something. If we all just did that, 1 to 300 would bring in $45,000. Let me put that into perspective of what that means. To finish the farm down in Honduras that we're going to go try to build, we need to raise $20,000 for it. And then one of our missionaries in Guatemala, they're needing a new car. They need, which if we got them $20,000 would be a huge portion of that. In this room, with no one giving more than $300, but all of us just doing something with what we have in our hand, we could meet the needs of the two biggest needs of both of those missionaries right now from this one room. You add another 150, 175 people. We have 500 people in this room, and no one gives more than $500. Everyone just gives what they can. We would bring in $125,000. We can all do something. But here's the thing, we don't all have to do all of it. We all have to do our part. And values should move us to action. So I want to end with this final story. This is of a family, a mom and her daughters. This is from 1946, around Easter. This is a widowed mother. The church said that the church they were attending said they wanted to collect money for a family in need in the church, and that the whole church was going to collect money and bring it in. So this family decided that they were going to live off of 50 pounds of potatoes for the entire month, keep the lights and radio off, and take on extra house and babysitting jobs, and make and sell pot holders. Their goal was to give sacrificially to that special church family. By Easter, they had saved $70, 3 crisp $20 bills and 1 $10 bill. More money than they had ever held. They went to church. They put the money in for that special offering. She handed the money to the kids so they could help, the 3 crisp $20 bills, the 1 $10 bill, and then they went home. Later that afternoon, the pastor showed up at their house, knocked on the door, and handed her an envelope and said, "This is from the church to help you." Inside of it were 3 crisp $20 bills, 1 $10 bill, and 17 $1 bills. And in that moment, they realized that they were the poor family. They had raised $70, and they got a total of $87. They didn't want to go to church the next Sunday because they felt defeated, but the mom made them. She still had the money in her purse. They got to church and a missionary was visiting and said they needed about $100 to finish a roof on a building. And immediately, the family all looked at each other. They pulled the money out and they gave it in the offering. At the end, they counted it and the missionary exclaimed, "Wow, you guys must have some rich families in this church. We brought in just over $100. And in that moment, they realized that they were the rich family because 87 of that just over 100 came from them. When you value something, you can make a difference. And it might cost some sacrifice for some time, but it's worth it. But we don't have to wait until we get something else to do it. We can do what God's called us to. We can make a difference with what is in our hand. And today, what I don't want to say, I don't want you to leave here without a chance to make a choice, to do something. So we're going to give you opportunities to make two choices today. Number one is that you can't live out the values God has for you if you don't know God. If you have never made a choice for yourself to say yes to Him and say, Lord, I don't know what it looks like, but I'm going to follow you. And I'm not going to be perfect, but you don't expect perfection. You just want me to keep coming to you for the rest of my life. I'm going to do that. Today, I choose to follow you no matter what. If you've never made that choice, I want to give you an opportunity to do that. So I'm going to ask everyone in here to close your eyes and put your heads down for a moment. No one looking around. I'm asking you to be respectful of those next to you to make this choice. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look around the room, and I'm just going to ask that if you're in here and either you've never made a choice to follow God, or maybe you have, but you're off course. You haven't been close to Him in a long time. And today you want to come back home. You want to come back to Him and say, I'm starting fresh today. This is my new beginning. August 10th, 2025 is when I make the choice to follow after God. I'm going to ask you just to raise your hand and look at me, and then we're going to pray together. I'm going to look around the room. If that's you, just raise your hand. Thank you. I see your hand down here. Thank you, ma'am. And just keep looking around the room. All right. Thank you. I see your hand. Thank you. Keep looking over here. Awesome. I see your hand there. Thank you. Come over to this side. Thank you. Come over to this side of the room. Just look up and raise your hand to me. Thank you. I see your hand there. Keep looking. Awesome. I see your hands up there. Thank you. I see your hand there. Keep looking. Thank you, guys. All right, we're going to start. Then what I'm going to do is have everyone in this room. We're all going to say this prayer together. And if you raised your hand, I'm just going to ask you to take this seriously. Treat it as a promise that you're making to God. That you're saying, I'm going to give you my all, and I thank you for giving me back so much more than I deserve. And what the Bible tells us is that when you ask Him into your life and you dedicate your life to Him, He says He'll never leave you or forsake you. He'll be with you forever. Someday when you die, you'll go to heaven. But the best thing is that He's always with us, and He'll lead you and guide you. And from today forward, even if the circumstances don't change immediately, you're not going through it alone anymore. So I'm just ask everyone to repeat this, and if you raised your hand, treat this as a promise between you and God. Everyone say, Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for loving me, for sending Jesus, your Son, to die for everything I've done wrong. Today I choose to accept your forgiveness of everything I've done wrong. Jesus, I ask you to be the Lord or in charge of my life. I believe that God rose you from the dead, and I give my life to you. Thank you for accepting me, arms wide open. From today forward, my life is yours. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, guys. That is amazing. Yes, round of applause for those that raised their hands. As we get ready to dismiss, there's one other thing, though, I'm going to ask of you guys, so don't disconnect quite yet. that was the first step. You have to know God in order to know the values that he has and to start to live those out. The second thing is that if you're in here and you're ready to take a step, to not just sit on the values, but to live them out, to be a part of the church and what God is doing, and you want to get involved in any way, then what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you after service to go out to the lobby, and right under where the TV is that says to drop off items for Bear Creek, we have a few people out there and some clipboards there. I'm going to ask you to write your name, give us your phone number and your email so we can get a hold of you, and then write what area you want to get involved in. If that's a missions trip, write down the country you want to go to. We're going to Honduras, Guatemala, and Bolivia. Those are the upcoming trips. Write one of those down. If you want to just get involved in the outreach, write that down. Or if you want to get involved in serving and being a part of the church and what we're doing here, reaching out to other families just like you, being a part of our prayer teams, our worship team, the greeters. We're moving the coffee shops. You probably saw that sign out there. If you want to be a part of serving, then write that down on there, serving. Or if you know what area you want to be involved in, say serving and then dash kids, whatever it is. But I want to give you guys an opportunity to act, because values produce action in our life. So head on out there, do that. Thank you guys for being with us. Love you all, appreciate you, and we'll see you next.